Plato was not the only student of Socrates, and one of his alleged students was a man named Aristippus of Cyrene. Aristippus was born in the Greek colony of Cyrene around 435 BCE in what is now modern Libya, and he is credited with founding the infamous philosophical school which derives its name from the city, the Cyrenaics. He is said to have moved to Athens, and like many young men in the city at the time, frequented the company of Socrates. Following the trial and death of Socrates in 399 BCE, little concrete is known of his movements, but he is alleged to have frequented the court of the tyrant of Syracuse, Dionysus. It is alleged that, unlike Plato who came to the court of Dionysus in the hopes of forging a philosopher king, Aristippus purely sought money and pleasure in Sicily, a charge which debased him in the eyes of his more virtue-minded contemporaries. The history of Aristippus is not, however, without its controversies. Although he is mentioned by both Plato and Aristotle in none too flattering terms, some scholars reject that he is the founder of the Cyrenaic tradition, instead crediting his grandson of the same name. Some even go so far as to label him a fiction of later writers, similar to the accusation levelled against Leucippus, the supposed founder of Greek atomism. Further adding to the difficulty of understanding the school, we are reduced to sifting through fragments, aphorisms, and tales to reconstruct the teachings of the schools, generally preserved in disapproving, if not outright hostile sources. Aristippus was linked with sophism and hedonism, and many tales revolve around him or his followers exchanging their wit and smarts for money and pleasure, often at the table of tyrants. Many tales and excerpts regarding Aristippus and the later Cyrenaics are preserved by the writings of Diogenes Laertius, and from these we can reconstruct Cyrenaicism, focusing heavily on their issues of both epistemology and ethics. The underlying epistemology of the Cyrenaics is skeptical, alleging that the only thing we can be sure of is the occurrence of our immediate sense experiences. For example, we can be aware of the sensation of sweetness. However, we cannot be sure that these sense experiences are actually linked to in any meaningful way to the physical world. For instance, although we believe we have eaten honey, we know that we are experiencing a sweet taste in this exact moment, we cannot know anything about the object which caused that sense experience. In this example, that the honey possesses some inherent quality of sweetness. This skeptical epistemology, similar to the more modern epistemological theory of subjectivism, was potentially influential on the later school of Pyrrhonism, and mirrored similar skeptical developments in the early Platonic Academy. The Cyrenaic ethical system argued that there was only two real experiences which defined the human condition: pleasure and pain. The Cyrenaics argued that pleasure was the goal for all humans, but rejected the distinction that Plato had made between higher intellectual and lower base pleasures. Taking into account the epistemology of the Cyrenaics, the only thing which had any real meaning was our immediate sensory experience of pleasure and pain. Therefore, they argued that to defer pleasure in pursuit of some future gain or virtue was foolish. This philosophy is best exemplified in the Roman satirist Lucian's summary of Aristippus's teachings. Think the worst of things, make the most of things, get all possible pleasure out of things. However, the Cyrenaics were not merely crass seekers of pleasure. They accepted that the blind pursuit of gratification could lead to pain and addiction. Aristippus himself often responded to such accusations that it was not shameful that he enjoyed pleasure, only that it would be shameful if he could not, at a moment, give it up. An apocryphal account of his uninterested pursuit of pleasure includes a story that, when presented 3 courtesans by Dionysus to choose from, he seized all 3, stating that even Paris got no good from choosing. However, upon reaching the threshold of his house, he dismissed all 3 of them. Another quote embodying this mentality is a response to the accusation that he had become infatuated with a woman, to which he responded that he possessed, but that he was not possessed. This argument obviously was not well received by the other philosophical schools which had begun to coalesce in the post-Socratic moment. One such criticism is preserved in another apocryphal encounter between Diogenes, the founder of Cynicism, and Aristippus. Diogenes was washing vegetables, and, spying Aristippus in his finery, chastised him, saying that if only he could be satisfied with vegetables, he wouldn't have to woo princes. Aristippus responded that if Diogenes knew how to woo princes, he too would scorn vegetables. The Cyrenaic school continued to flourish for at least 200 years, but the later Cyrenaics moderated the flouting of convention and outrage attributed to Aristippus. They brought the focus of pleasure back to the intellectual and societal pleasures lauded by the Platonists, and possibly under the influence of some Buddhist sources, even began to doubt the possibility of attaining true, unsullied pleasure due to its inevitable disappearance. However, in the long run the school became less and less popular, crowded out by the more successful materialist Epicureans and the skeptical Pyrrhonist schools. Although little of the Cyrenaic school survives down to this time, this earliest recorded defense of the pursuit of pleasure and skepticism remains an interesting example of the rich variety of classical Mediterranean philosophy.